He was told his inheritance was worthless, a burden he would carry out into a world that already saw him as one. What he discovered buried on that land, beneath decades of neglect, would redefine the meaning of home, family, and sacrifice. If you believe that our past doesn't have to define our future and that second chances are not just given but built, then hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. The key felt cold in my hand, colder than the gray March morning that was seeping through the cracks of the institution's front door. It wasn't a key to a car or a house with a welcome mat. It was a small, rusted key to a post office box in a town I'd never heard of. That and a folded, brittle piece of paper were the sum total of my inheritance. On my 18th birthday, the day I officially aged out of the state's care, I was handed my life in a manila envelope. Inside was my birth certificate, my social security card, $100 in cash, and the deed. The deed to 600 acres of nothing in a place called Sparrow Creek. Mr. Henderson, the facility director, had explained it with a tired sort of pity. Your grandfather, Arthur Vance, left it to you. It's all he had. From what the county clerk told me, it's mostly undeveloped timberland, and there are back taxes owed, son, a significant amount. He'd clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt like a push out the door. My advice? Find the county office, sign it over to them to settle the debt. It's a clean break. Start fresh. A clean break. For the last 10 years, since the day my grandfather had dropped me off here with a trembling hug and a promise to return that he never kept, my life had been nothing but breaks. A break from family. A break from a past I barely remembered. A break from the very idea of belonging anywhere. And now I was supposed to break from the only thing I had left of him, a piece of paper that smelled like dust and disappointment. I stood on the curb, the heavy door of the Northgate Youth Center clicking shut behind me, severing the final thread. The world felt enormous and loud. Cars hissed by on the wet pavement, people hurried past, their faces set, their destinations known. I had a bus ticket in my pocket, paid for by the state, and a duffel bag at my feet containing 3 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book about stars, and the envelope. My entire existence could be held in my 2 hands. I looked at the deed again. The language was archaic, full of heretofores and whereases, but 2 things were clear: my name, Leo Vance, and the number, 600 acres. I tried to picture it. In my mind, it was a dark, tangled forest, choked with weeds and forgotten memories, a place as empty and unwelcoming as the future felt. Mr. Henderson's words echoed in my head. A clean break. Start fresh. It was practical advice, sensible. The $100 in my pocket wouldn't last a week. The back taxes were a chain I didn't need. Signing it away was the smart move. But it was from him, my grandfather. The man who taught me how to find the North Star, whose hands smelled of soil and sawdust, whose voice was the last gentle sound I remembered before the world became a series of ringing bells and scheduled meals. He had abandoned me, yes. He had broken his promise, but he had left me this land, this last tangible piece of himself. How could I just give it away without even seeing it, without standing on the ground he'd walked, breathing the air he'd breathed? I clutched the envelope to my chest. The bus to Sparrow Creek left in an hour. It was a 6-hour ride into the rural heart of the state, a place people left, not a place they went to. Every logical part of my brain screamed at me to walk to the county building, to sign the papers, and use the bus ticket to go anywhere else. A city, maybe, find a job washing dishes, a room to rent, and disappear into the anonymity of the crowd. That was the path to survival. But survival wasn't the same as living. For 10 years, I had survived. I had learned to make myself small, to expect nothing, to build walls around the hollow space inside me. Maybe this was my one chance to do something else, to choose a path that wasn't laid out for me by the state or dictated by practicality. Maybe this was my chance to find an answer, not just about the land, but about him, about why he left me, why he never came back. A fine, misty rain began to fall, plastering my thin jacket to my skin. The cold was starting to sink in. I made a decision. It wasn't a brave or a smart one. It was just the only one that felt like mine. I zipped up my jacket, slung the duffel bag over my shoulder, and started walking toward the bus station. I was going to Sparrow Creek. I was going to see my inheritance. I was going home, even if home was just 600 acres of debt and dirt. It was my debt, my dirt. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like something. It felt like everything. The bus smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. I took a seat by a window streaked with rain, the city's gray landscape blurring into a watercolor smear as we pulled away from the station. For the first few hours, I watched the concrete and steel give way to strip malls, then suburbs, then finally to the wide, open expanse of the countryside. The sky was a vast, bruised sheet of purple and gray. The trees were bare, their skeletal branches reaching up like pleading hands. It was a lonely landscape, but it didn't feel threatening. It felt quiet. It felt like it was waiting. I thought about the other kids back at Northgate. Most of them had stories far worse than mine, stories of abuse and neglect that made my simple abandonment feel almost like a kindness. We were all bound by a shared language of loss, of being on the outside of the warm, brightly lit houses we passed. We all dreamed of the day we'd turn 18 and be free. But watching the miles of empty road unspool before me, I wasn't sure what freedom was supposed to feel like. It mostly felt like being untethered, a balloon released into a stormy sky. I pulled out the envelope again and studied the deed. The property was described by its boundaries, so many feet from an old oak, following the line of a dry creek bed bordering a county road. It was a map written in a language I didn't understand. Tucked inside the fold of the deed was a small black and white photograph I hadn't noticed before. It was faded and creased, the corners soft with age. A man and a young boy stood in front of a simple wood frame house. The man was tall and weathered, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He had one hand on the boy's shoulder. The boy was me. I couldn't have been more than 5 or 6. I was smiling, a gap-toothed, unburdened smile I didn't recognize as my own. It was a ghost of a life I could barely recall. The house in the background. It had to be the one on the property, my home. A lump formed in my throat. I traced the outline of my grandfather's face with my thumb. This was the man I remembered. The man who smelled of pine needles and engine oil. The man who told me stories about constellations, calling them the sky's own treasure map. He hadn't looked like a man who would break a promise. He looked like a man who would build a fortress to keep you safe. What had happened? What had changed? The bus rumbled on, its engine a monotonous drone. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, the driver was calling out, "Sparrow Creek! Last stop, son. This is you." I blinked, disoriented. The bus was empty except for me. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the world was shrouded in a thick, damp fog. I grabbed my bag and stumbled down the steps into the twilight. The bus pulled away with a hiss of its air brakes, its red taillights quickly swallowed by the mist, leaving me in an almost profound silence. I was standing in front of a single, sad-looking building with a flickering sign that read, "General Store." A couple of gas pumps stood like sentinels out front. Across the street, a boarded-up diner and a small post office were the only other signs of life. This was it. This was Sparrow Creek. It wasn't just a small town. It was a town that felt like it was holding its breath, waiting to be forgotten completely. My instructions from the county clerk, who I'd called from a payphone at the bus station, were simple. Follow County Road 7 out of town for about 3 miles. You'll see an old mailbox with the name Vance on it. Faded, but it's there. The lane goes back a ways. 3 miles. It was getting dark. There were no streetlights, no sidewalks. Just the two-lane road disappearing into the fog. I cinched my jacket tighter and started walking. The air was cold and clean, smelling of wet earth and pine. The silence was broken only by the crunch of my own footsteps on the gravel shoulder and the distant call of a bird. It was unnerving at first. At Northgate there was always noise. The hum of fluorescent lights, the clang of doors, the murmur of voices. Out here the silence was so complete, it felt like a presence. After what felt like an eternity, my eyes caught something in the gloom. A leaning, weather-beaten post on the side of the road. I stepped closer. There it was, barely visible under a coat of moss and rust. VANCE. The mailbox door was hanging open, like a silent, waiting mouth. Behind it, a narrow track, more two ruts of dirt than a lane, vanished into a dark stand of trees. This was it. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs, and stepped off the county road onto the path. The trees immediately closed in around me, their branches interlocking overhead, creating a tunnel of darkness. The fog swirled around my feet. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sounded impossibly loud. A part of me, the part that had been trained for 10 years to be wary of the unknown, wanted to turn back, to run to the relative safety of the deserted town. But the photograph in my pocket felt warm against my chest. I thought of that little boy with the gap-toothed smile. He had lived here. He had not been afraid. I kept walking, pushing deeper into the woods, deeper into the past. The lane curved, and then, through a break in the trees, I saw it. A silhouette against the darkening sky. A house. Small, simple, its roofline sagging in the middle like a tired old man's shoulders. A single window, dark and empty, stared out at me like a hollow eye. It wasn't a fortress. It was a ruin, but it was my ruin. It was my home. The porch steps groaned under my weight, a sound of protest after years of silence. The front door was locked, its blue paint peeling away to show the weathered gray wood beneath. I remembered the key from the envelope. It wasn't for the post office box. I slid it into the lock. It was stiff, resistant. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it wouldn't work. Then, with a final gritty turn, there was a loud, satisfying clunk. The lock gave way. I pushed the door open. The air that rolled out to meet me was thick and musty, the smell of trapped time. It was the smell of dust, of decaying paper, of cold, stagnant air. I stepped inside, my feet shuffling on the gritty floor. I couldn't see much, just the faint outlines of furniture draped in white cloths, like a room full of ghosts. I fumbled along the wall until my fingers found a light switch. I flicked it up. Nothing, of course. The power had been off for a decade. I pulled a small flashlight from my duffel bag, the one piece of practical equipment I'd thought to bring. Its thin beam cut a nervous path through the darkness. I was in a small living room. A sofa and an armchair, both shrouded, sat before a stone fireplace. A layer of dust, thick as a blanket of snow, covered everything. Cobwebs hung in the corners like macabre decorations. It was a place that hadn't been lived in, truly lived in, for a very long time. I moved through the house like an archaeologist exploring a tomb. A small kitchen with a thick film of grease on the stove. A tiny bathroom where a bar of soap had petrified in its dish. And then a bedroom, one bedroom. A simple iron bed frame stood against the far wall, stripped bare. A wooden dresser was next to it, its drawers hanging slightly open. This must have been his room. My grandfather's. My room, I remembered, had been a small alcove off the living room, just big enough for a cot and a small crate for my toys. I shone the light in there. It was empty. The cot was gone. The crate was gone. It was just an empty space, as if I had never been there at all. A familiar coldness crept into my chest, the feeling of being erased. I went back to the main room, my flashlight beam dancing over the shrouded furniture. This was a mistake. Mr. Henderson was right. This wasn't a home, it was a mausoleum. There was nothing here for me but dust and bad memories I couldn't even fully grasp. The weight of the back taxes, the isolation, the sheer hopelessness of it all crashed down on me. I sank onto the edge of the covered sofa, the dust puffing up around me in a cloud. I was tired, so deeply, bone-achingly tired. I buried my face in my hands, the silence of the house pressing in. Maybe I'd just sleep here tonight, on the floor. And in the morning I'd walk back to town, find a phone and call the county, sign it all away, a clean break. My foot bumped against something on the floor. I shone the light down. It was a loose floorboard right under the edge of a braided rag rug. It was just a fraction of an inch higher than the others. A splintered edge. Curiosity, the last flicker of a dying hope, stirred in me. I knelt down, my knees cracking in the cold, and worked my fingers into the gap. The wood was rough. I pulled. It resisted, then gave way with a low groan. Beneath it was a hollow space, and nestled inside that space, wrapped in oilcloth, was a metal box. It was an old Army surplus ammunition box, painted dark green, with a sturdy latch on the front. My heart started to pound, a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. This was not random. This was placed here, hidden. My fingers fumbled with the cold metal of the latch. It was stiff with rust and disuse. I pried at it, my breath held tight in my chest, until it finally sprang open with a sharp metallic snap. I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of yellowed newspaper clippings, was a stack of envelopes, tied together with a piece of twine. On top of the stack was a single, thicker envelope with my name, Leo, written on the front in a strong, slightly shaky hand, my grandfather's handwriting. I recognized it instantly from the 1 or 2 birthday cards he'd sent in the early years, before they, too, had stopped. My hands were trembling as I lifted the envelope out. It was heavy. I tore it open. Inside wasn't just a letter. There were several pages filled with that same familiar script, and money, a thick wad of cash held together with a rubber band. I counted it under the narrow beam of my flashlight. 50s and 20s. It was over $2,000, enough to pay the back taxes, enough to live on for months, enough to give me a choice. And then there was the letter. I unfolded the pages, my heart hammering. I took a deep breath of the dusty air and began to read. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone. It means that after all these years, you have finally come home. And for that, I am more sorry than you will ever know. I am sorry for the silence. I am sorry for the broken promise. I am sorry I was not the man you deserved." The words blurred through the sudden film of tears in my eyes. I wiped them away impatiently and kept reading. "I know you must hate me. You have every right to. I want you to know that not a day has gone by, not a single one, that I haven't thought of you. Leaving you at that place was the hardest thing I have ever done. It was like tearing out my own heart. But I need you to understand, Leo. I didn't abandon you. I saved you." Saved me? From what? The house was silent, safe. The world outside was quiet. What danger could there have been in this forgotten place? "There are things about our family, about your father, that I never told you. Things I hoped you would never have to know. Your father, he was a good man at his core, but he got mixed up with some very bad people. They weren't from around here. They were involved in things I can't write down, things that put a shadow over this land, over our lives. When he died, they thought he had left something with me, something they wanted back. They made threats, Leo, not just to me, but to you." My blood ran cold. I looked around the dark, empty room, suddenly feeling watched. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, more menacing. "I couldn't protect you here, not on my own. I was getting older, and they were relentless. The only way to keep you safe was to make you disappear, to put you into the system where they couldn't find you. I told everyone I sent you to live with a distant relative out of state. I let the farm go to seed, made it look like I had nothing, that I was just a broken old man waiting to die. It was all a lie, a long, terrible lie to keep you alive. I prayed every night that you would be safe, that you would grow up strong, and that one day you would be old enough and smart enough to find your way back here." I had to stop reading. I lowered the pages, my whole body shaking. 10 years of bitterness, of feeling thrown away and forgotten. It was all built on a misunderstanding, a lie. But it was a lie told to protect me. He hadn't abandoned me. He had hidden me. The weight of that sacrifice, the sheer loneliness he must have endured in this empty house, was crushing. I wasn't an orphan because I was unloved. I was an orphan because I was loved too much. I sat there on the dusty floor, the cold seeping into my bones, and I cried. I cried for the little boy who waited by the window for a car that never came. I cried for the old man who had to push his own grandson away to save him. I cried for the years we lost, the stories he never got to tell me, the constellations he never got to show me. The grief was a raw, physical thing, a storm that broke inside the silent house. It was too much. The revelation, the money, the sudden, violent rewriting of my entire life story. I just sat there, the letter clutched in my hand, the weight of a life I never knew crashing down on me. It was overwhelming. Listen, if you've ever felt like your past was a mystery you couldn't solve, like you were a stranger in your own story, maybe you get it. Maybe you understand that feeling when a single piece of information comes along and shatters the whole foundation you're standing on. It's terrifying, but it's also a beginning. We're going to get through this together. Your stories of discovery, of finding truth in unexpected places, they matter here. Share them in the comments because every story shared makes us all feel a little less alone. Now, let's get back to that farmhouse. After the storm of grief passed, a strange calm settled over me. The house no longer felt like a tomb. It felt different. It felt like a sanctuary, a place of refuge that had been held in trust for me. The dust and decay weren't signs of neglect, but the camouflage of a long and patient vigil. I picked up the flashlight and read the rest of the letter. The money should be enough to settle the taxes with the county. Don't let them take this place, Leo. This land is your birthright. It is all we have. There are more letters in the box. Read them in order. They will explain everything. Be careful. The shadows from the past are long, but this land is strong, and so are you. You are a Vance. Never forget that. All my love, Grandpa Arthur. I looked back into the ammo box. As he'd said, there were nearly a dozen other envelopes, each numbered in pencil on the corner. This was the roadmap he'd left for me, the treasure map to my own life. The first thing I did the next morning was walk back into town. The fog had lifted, revealing a crisp, clear sky. The world looked new. Sparrow Creek seemed a little less sad in the daylight. I found the post office and used the key. Inside the small box was another key, slightly larger, and a slip of paper with the address of a law firm in the next town over, Reed and Associates. I bought some bread, cheese, and a bottle of water at the general store. The woman behind the counter, who looked to be about my grandfather's age, with sharp, bird-like eyes, watched me as I paid. "You're new," she said. It wasn't a question. "Just arrived," I said. "You staying at the old Vance place?" News traveled fast. "Yes, ma'am, I'm Leo. Arthur Vance was my grandfather." Her expression softened instantly. A genuine sad smile touched her lips. I'm Martha. I knew your grandfather well. He was a good man, quiet, kept to himself these last years." She paused, her eyes searching my face. "He'd be glad you came back." Her words were a balm. Someone here knew him. Someone remembered him as more than just a recluse. It was another small piece of the puzzle falling into place. Back at the house, I started cleaning. It was a daunting task, but it felt necessary. As I swept away the thick layers of dust and wiped down the grime-caked windows, the house began to breathe again. Sunlight streamed into the living room, illuminating the floating dust motes like tiny, glittering stars. I uncovered the furniture. It was simple, handmade, and sturdy, a testament to my grandfather's skill. This house wasn't a ruin, it was just sleeping. That afternoon, I opened the second letter. It was shorter. It told me about a development company, Horizon Development, that had been trying to buy up land in the area for years. "They approached me many times, Leo," he wrote. "Their offers got bigger and bigger. They want this land for something specific. They're not interested in the timber or farming. They want what's under it. But this land is more valuable than any money they could ever offer. I told them no every time. I expect they'll come for you too now that I'm gone. They'll see a young man alone with a tax bill he can't pay. They'll offer you a fortune. Don't listen to them. Their money is poison. The letter ended there. No explanation of what was under the land or why their money was poison, just a stark warning. The very next day, as if summoned by the letter itself, a sleek black car I never would have expected to see in Sparrow Creek kicked up dust as it drove down my lane. A woman in a sharp gray suit got out. She was polished, professional, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Leo Vance?" she asked, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "My name is Flora Jennings. I'm with Horizon Development." I didn't take her hand. I just stood on the porch, my arms crossed. "We were so sorry to hear about your grandfather's passing," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "We had a great deal of respect for him. We also understand that you've inherited this property, along with a considerable tax liability. We're here to help." She opened a leather-bound portfolio. "We are prepared to offer you $250,000 for these 600 acres. We'll cover all back taxes and closing costs. You walk away with $250,000, free and clear. A fresh start." There it was again. A fresh start. The same words Mr. Henderson had used. It was the world's easy answer for a life like mine. Take the money, erase the past, and run. A week ago, I would have jumped at the offer. It was more money than I could have imagined. It was safety. It was a future. But now I had my grandfather's warning echoing in my ears. "Why do you want it so bad?" I asked, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "It's a strategic acquisition for a future project. That's all I can tell you at this time. The offer is more than generous, Mr. Vance. It's a lifeline." "I'll think about it," I said. "The offer is only on the table for 48 hours, she replied, her tone hardening slightly. The silk was gone. This was business. "Don't be sentimental. It's a plot of dirt and dying trees. Take the money." She left her card on the porch railing and departed in a cloud of dust. I watched until her car was gone. $250,000. The number was dizzying. It could change my entire life. But my grandfather's words were clear. Their money is poison. I needed a lawyer. I needed to see Ms. Reed. The next morning I took the first bus to the neighboring town, a larger, more bustling place than Sparrow Creek. Reed and Associates was in a small, tidy brick building on the main square. The woman at the front desk led me to an office lined with books. A woman with graying hair and intelligent, weary eyes rose to greet me. This was Evelyn Reed. "Leo Vance," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "Your grandfather told me you might come one day. I'm so sorry for your loss. Arthur was a very principled man." She already knew. Of course she did. She was part of his plan. I explained about the deed, the box, the money for the taxes, and the offer from Horizon Development. She listened patiently, nodding, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. $250,000? They're getting desperate. That's 5 times what the land is appraised for." "Why?" I asked. "What do they want?" "Your grandfather commissioned a geological survey a few years back," she said, pulling a thick file from her cabinet. "He never told me the full results, but he told me enough. There's a massive deposit of exceptionally pure quartz deep beneath your property. It's a key component in manufacturing high-end electronics, semiconductors, that sort of thing. It's worth millions. Many millions." The room seemed to tilt. This whole time, I had been living on top of a fortune. So my grandfather was sitting on a gold mine and he lived like he did? I asked, thinking of the small, sparse house, the simple life. "The money wasn't what mattered to Arthur," Evelyn said gently. "The land was. He knew that type of deep vein mining would destroy the entire 600 acres. It would poison the water table, destroy the ecosystem. It would leave a scar on the earth that would never heal. He refused to let that happen. So that was it. It wasn't just about money. It was about principle. It was about protecting the land itself. Horizon knows about the courts, she continued. They've been trying to get their hands on that land for 15 years. They pressured your father first. I don't know all the details, but I know he got in over his head with some of their less reputable associates, people hired to persuade landowners. After he passed, they turned their attention to Arthur. Suddenly, my grandfather's letter made a terrifying kind of sense. The bad people, the threats. They weren't random criminals. They were connected to Horizon development. They had driven my father to his death and had threatened a child to get what they wanted. The poison my grandfather had written about wasn't just metaphorical. It was real. What do I do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. That, Evelyn said, her eyes full of a sad wisdom, is a choice only you can make. You can take their money. Legally, it's a clean sale. You could disappear, live a comfortable life, and no one would blame you. Or you can fight. Arthur set up a conservation trust in his will. He poured almost every penny he ever saved into it. It's designed to protect the land in perpetuity, to turn it into a registered nature preserve. But it needs to be activated by you, the heir. If you do that, you can never sell to a developer. The land will be protected forever, but you'll also have no fortune to speak of. You'll just have the land. She slid a document across the desk. It was the trust, my choice. $250,000 and a fresh start, or a piece of land and a legacy of integrity. The weight of the decision felt immense. I returned to the farm that evening in a daze. The setting sun cast long shadows through the trees, and the house seemed to be waiting for my answer. I knew I had to read the rest of the letters. I sat at the simple wooden table my grandfather had likely built himself and laid them out in order. Letter by letter, he filled in the gaps. He wrote about my mother, who died when I was a baby, and about the joy my father and I had brought him. He wrote about my father's struggles after her death, his vulnerability, and how Horizon's people had exploited it, luring him in with promises of easy money before trapping him in debt and threats. He described his own desperate attempts to get my father out, but it was too late. His death, ruled an accident, was something my grandfather never believed. They took my son, Leo, he wrote, his handwriting shaky with an old, cold rage. I would not let them take you, too. The final letter was different. It wasn't about the past or the danger or the developers. It was about the land itself. When you were a boy, it began, we used to walk these woods every evening. I would point out the different trees to you, the oak, the hickory, the pine. I taught you the names of the birds by their songs. You loved the creek, the way the sunlight filtered through the canopy and danced on the water. You said it was magic. You were right, Leo. It is magic. This land isn't just dirt and trees. It's a living thing. It's a complete ecosystem, one of the last untouched hardwood forests in this part of the state. There are species of plants here, of insects that are found almost nowhere else. In the spring, the whole valley fills with a particular type of monarch butterfly on its migration. They only stop in places with a specific kind of milkweed, a kind that only grows in this soil. For 2 weeks, the air is filled with orange and black wings. It's a cathedral, my boy, a living, breathing church. That is the real treasure here, not the rock buried miles beneath it. This, the life on top of it. Tears streamed down my face, dripping onto the old paper. I could almost hear his voice, calm and steady, telling me about the magic of the woods. The quartz in the ground is just dead rock. It holds no life. They want to trade this cathedral for dead rock. I couldn't let them. Now it's up to you. I am not asking you to live my life or to be poor for the sake of my principles. I am asking you to stand on the porch, to walk down to the creek, to listen to the birds, and then to decide what wealth really is. Whatever you choose, know that I have always loved you. Know that I am proud of the man you have become. The letter ended there. My choice. I didn't have to think about it, not for a second. The answer was already in my heart. It had been growing there since the moment I first set foot back on this property. The next morning, the 48 hours were up. I didn't wait for Sarah Jennings to come back. I used the money my grandfather left me to pay the back taxes at the county courthouse. The clerk stamped the papers with a satisfying thud. The land was officially cleanly mine. Then I went to Evelyn Reed's office. "I've made my decision," I told her. She looked at me, a knowing, hopeful light in her eyes. "And I want to activate the trust," I said. "Let's protect the land." A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. "Your grandfather would be so proud, Leo." We spent the rest of the day signing papers, legal documents that felt more significant than any deed. I was signing away millions of dollars in potential wealth, but it felt like I was gaining something infinitely more valuable. I was claiming my inheritance, the real one. Not the money, not the quartz, but the legacy of stewardship, the responsibility, the home. When I got back to the farm that evening, the air felt different, lighter. A great weight had been lifted. The threat that had shadowed this land for my entire life was finally gone. I stood on the porch and took a deep breath. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. It smelled of peace. The work was just beginning. The house needed a new roof. The plumbing needed to be fixed. The lane was washed out in places. I had a little money left from my grandfather, but it wouldn't last forever. I would have to get a job in town, work with my hands, and slowly, piece by piece, bring this place back to life. It would be hard. It would be a struggle. But for the first time in my life, I felt a profound sense of purpose. I wasn't just fixing a house. I was rebuilding a home. I was honoring a sacrifice. In the coming weeks, I fell into a rhythm. I got a part-time job at the general store, stocking shelves and helping Martha. The people of Sparrow Creek, who had been wary at first, slowly began to open up. They shared stories about my grandfather, about the farm in its better days. I wasn't just the Vance boy anymore. I was Leo. I started to feel like I belonged. Every evening, I would work on the house until the sun went down. I patched the roof, replaced the broken window panes, and started clearing the overgrown yard. One day, while clearing brush near the creek, I found a small, flat stone with a carving on it. It was a crude drawing of the Big Dipper. I remembered my grandfather all those years ago teaching me how to find the North Star. He called it the sky's compass. He had left me more than one map. He had taught me how to find my own way. I am still here. The house is still a work in progress, but it's warm and dry now. The fields are still wild, but they are safe. I often walk the woods, just as he described in his letter. I've learned the names of the birds. I've sat by the creek and watched the sunlight dance on the water. I am waiting for the spring, for the arrival of the butterflies. I'm waiting to see the cathedral come to life. This journey taught me that inheritance isn't about what you're given, but what you choose to build with it. It's not about money or property, but about the values and the love that are passed down. My grandfather left me 600 acres of land, but he gave me something so much more important. A choice to turn my back on the easy money and embrace a legacy of purpose. He gave me back my past, and in doing so, he gave me a future, a real one. Not a fresh start that erases everything, but a new beginning built firmly on the foundations of who I am and where I come from. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that the most valuable things in life are the ones that can't be bought or sold, consider subscribing and joining our community. This is a place for people who are rebuilding, reconnecting, and finding their own way home. Please share what home means to you in the comments below. I read every single one because every story of finding where you belong makes the world feel a little less lonely. Thank you for listening.